Our coverage of the killing of Trayvon Martin, the trial of George Zimmerman, continues. To help us watch the trial today, we have former prosecutor Casimir, and we also have trial attorney Jennifer Zedalis, who is with us via Skype from Levin College of Law in Gainesville, Florida, where she is a professor. Welcome back to both of you. The trial is ongoing right now. In fact, Dennis Root, who is a safety and law enforcement instructor, is on the stand being questioned by Mark O'Mara. Let's listen in to a little bit of this testimony. We'll talk about it on the back end.
Experience and training is because of your law enforcement background. You deal with law enforcement events, correct?
Yes.
Have you had experience where you handle non-law enforcement shooting events?
Yes.
Okay. So do you have an experience level that covers both law enforcement and non-law enforcement shootings?
Yes.
Is the majority of yours, however, in law enforcement shootings?
Yes.
By nature of you being a cop?
And yes, and just retired a couple of years ago.
Okay. With realizing that, using the complete broad base of your experience, including law enforcement shootings and non-law enforcement shootings, what are the concerns that exist with interviewing a person who's been involved in the event of a shooting?
Memory issues. Generally speaking, the primary concern is people, when they're involved in a high-stress event, can have what they call critical stress amnesia, or they can have temporary memory holes, I call them, that sometimes it takes up to 72 hours before they truly get their full memory back about everything that took place. And for some, depending on the stress of the event, they may never remember everything that took place.
What are the concerns then with interviewing those people within that time period from a law enforcement perspective?
Well, the concerns, I think, whether it's law enforcement or anything, your primary concerns with conducting the interviews is how accurate the information is going to be. Has the person been able to reconcile and compartmentalize the event itself and start to accept what has taken place so that they can come forward with all the information? And then there's always the problem also that if I use myself as a reference, if I was involved in a shooting and I gave you a statement, an hour later, and then tomorrow I remember something a little bit differently because my memory is evolving and I'm starting to work through my own personal conflicts, whatever the case might be, I can have a varied statement now. And if too much weight is given, depending on the variation, I'm not talking about a completely different change in statements. I'm talking about slight changes or modifications. If too much weight's given to a change, now the person's expected that, well, now I'm lying. And the reality
All right,
is
we're listening to the testimony of Dennis Root, who is a safety and law enforcement instructor, a former law enforcement officer, the defense witness who is analyzing the evidence that surrounds the shooting of Trayvon Martin. Again, I'm joined here in the studio by Casimir and on Skype with law professor Jennifer Zedalis. Let me ask you a question about this witness that's on the stand right now. I understand through reports from reporters that are in the courtroom that he reached out to the defense and said, I can help, I can provide a perspective, and now they have him on the stand. That seems right. A little hinky, doesn't
Experts getting fees for testifying. That is the business, unfortunately, of getting experts to testify. They do get a fee. He solicited this job. What the defense is trying to do here with him is try to paint a picture of what happened for the jury to see it from their perspective. And earlier he testified to Zimmerman's training in martial arts, how he was not an inept, let's say, defensive person who could not box very well. He's trying to establish that, trying to paint Zimmerman as a more meeker man than he may appear, right now, especially with the 300 pounds or so that it looks like he's gained in the last year. And I think the attempt by the defense here is to try to demonstrate to the jury, and by using this expert who's seen combat scenes and reviewed them, gotten opinions from everybody, that that what happened here was consistent with a fight, was consistent with maybe, there's no way you could tell who started the fight, but there was definitely a defensive combat posture going on here, and that it was not a brutal assault one on the other.
And Jennifer, it would seem to me it'd be easy enough for the prosecution to, if not neutralize this witness, diminish his effectiveness, if they just point out that Dennis Root reached out to the defense, and doesn't that show a bias?
Absolutely. I'm sure that will be part of the state's cross-examination, Deborah. He sought out a role in the case. And of course, that doesn't mean that the jurors will discount his evidence, but absolutely, that's something that the jurors can consider. And, I think that the defense strategy here, as we've seen with a lot of the witnesses, including the martial arts expert that my colleague was discussing, they're trying to get as much evidence as they can in on behalf of their client without putting their client on the stand and subjecting him thereby to cross-examination. And of course, the state's trying to limit what they can do because the state, if Mr. Zimmerman doesn't take the stand, the state can't cross-examine him.
Right, and to that point, I think it's very unlikely that, if not, not at all possible, that George Zimmerman is going to be put on the stand.
Yeah, I don't see them doing that.
Me either.
Right. Well, with this particular witness, he's gone through point by point several pieces of evidence around the shooting. He's talked about how long the struggle could have taken based on what we hear on those 911 calls. He's even made this statement that I saw reported that Trayvon Martin was a physically active and capable person. How is he able to make that claim?
I think that's a stretch a little bit. I think he was just trying and put out there that, he didn't see any issues or inability or disabilities with regard to Mr. Martin. The most interesting thing he said is he thought Martin was 20 years old, had the physical physique of a 20 or 21-year-old man at first glance of the pictures. Again, the defense is trying to suggest that this was an even matchup of some sort and that Trayvon could have been the aggressor here. That's their whole point in doing all this. And as my colleague points out, to keep Zimmerman off the stand, let him tell his story through other people.
Well, I don't know why the prosecution is not objecting just like every 2 seconds with this. Jennifer, what do you think?
Well, there have been some objections, Deborah, that I would have made as the prosecution that have not been made. But of course, they have their own theory and their own ideas about things, and they may be approaching it differently. I think they have been fairly aggressive in some areas. In other areas, I've heard some matters I probably would have objected to on both sides. But it's a difficult case, and I think all of the attorneys on both sides are working very hard.
Indeed. Okay. So just in the last couple of minutes that we have here, let's talk about the deliberation. So defense says they're going to finish their case in chief today. There might be a rebuttal case, and then, of course, the closing arguments. Do you expect, just based on what you have observed with this trial, very briefly, that this will be a long deliberation or a short deliberation? Let me start with you first, Jennifer.
If I had to call it, I hesitate to do that, Deborah. If I had to call it, I would say a lengthy deliberation. I think because they have options. Of course, they have the manslaughter. They have a lesser included option that I'm certain is going to be on the table. There's been a lot of evidence on both sides, a lot of things they have to consider. So if I had to call it, if you held my feet to the fire, I'm going to say a lengthy deliberation.
All right, very briefly.
I think they will be deliberating for some time because I think this case has a lot of gravitas to us, and they're not just going to dismiss it out hand.
All right, we will see. Gary Casimir, Jennifer Zedalis, thank you to both of you. We do appreciate it.
Thank you.
And this is Arise America.